Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm doing a book review of the second book in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, something that Disney and Lucasfilm have entitled the Legends series. Well, this is a book by John Jackson Miller entitled The Lost Tribe of the Sith, The Collected Stories. Now, when I went through this the first time, I didn't know what this book was about, and I'm trying to, though generally I've got an idea of sort of where the storyline's going, I didn't know the specifics, and I thought this was just really going to be disconnected short stories. And there are 9 short stories, really 8, and then the 9th is a full-length novella, so over 100 pages. And what it is it is a connection of one tribe throughout thousands of years. And when I finished part 1, I realized, oh, this is one story that we're getting about 9 chapters of, or 9 scenes of, in this long story. And that was even more exciting. So John Jackson Miller, the author of this book, he's a big Star Wars author, and many are familiar with him. If you're familiar with the Star Wars books, he is a really master of tie-in fiction stories. He's written for, oh my goodness, he's written for Star Trek, for Star Wars, for Batman. He's written for, I think there's at least one Halo tie-in that he's done. But more than just writing for these things, he is an award-winning author. So the Scribe Award, it's given to the best tie-in fiction novel of the year. And he's been nominated several times, and he's actually won this award several times. And that just shows the quality of his work. And you could sense the quality in this story. This is written as a prequel to the Fate of the Jedi series. We'll get there later in our read-through of the entire expanding universe, or the Legends stories. But what they wanted was to go back and have a prequel of this lost tribe who are going to be fighting against Luke Skywalker in the future. How did they get there? How did they originate? What's their story? So they asked him to go back sort of retroactively and write this book, and he did a great job. So what is the plot? Well, a group of Sith working as traders, not traitors, traders, for a dark Sith overlord crash onto an isolated and previously undiscovered planet named Kesh. Yaru Corson is the captain of the ship. The ship's called the Omen, and is the natural leader of this tribe. And so yes, when they get off this smoldering ship, they realize that there is not any hope really of repairing the ship at this point. There's this new planet where everything seems to want to try to kill them. So he tries to create some order. He tries to establish a fledgling colony, but things look up when he and they realize that this is not an abandoned planet, and there is a sentient native population. The Kashiri, this planet is called Kesh, and as they make contact with the Kashiri, the Sith are going to do what the Sith are going to do, which is try to take over and dominate. So these 9 stories, they span thousands of years, and there are numerous generations of Sith. And it's so interesting because when you would jump from story to story, after the first story of Yaru and his crew, that takes several parts. But once you kind of move past that, you're jumping like hundreds, if not thousands of years. And the previous stories become legend and almost become the like religion of the next stories, which I think is such a cool element where you feel like you're a part of this history because you've experienced these stories in real time, and then you hear them hearkened back to in later generations. But what he does a great job of, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that these Sith live in a constant tension. And what that is they are motivated by pride. They're motivated by power, by selfishness, and they want to rule. Every single one of them has their own goals, their own end in mind. and they are willing and probably excited to move other people out of the way in order to accomplish their goal. The problem is that when you are trying to build a civilization, at some point you have to work together. And at some point you have to trust one another. And that is against every natural inclination that the Sith have. So witnessing that tension the whole time was so interesting. I thought Miller did a great job. Not every Sith is as bad as every Sith could be. And there are some, actually, characters that you can empathize with. You can appreciate, yeah, these would be considered in this sort of trajectory, in this span of characters. There are good guys who are the Sith. There are certainly bad guys. One of the short stories actually has a Jedi who crash lands onto this planet. You don't know that he's a Jedi until later on, and you can read it for yourself to find out which story that is. But that's the one time that even in the midst of the world that you're living in, sort of really, really bad to, somewhat good characters, this Jedi's presence is really the one time that Miller really shows, even though we're talking about really, really bad to comparatively good, it's still evil. It's still dark. And from that Jedi's perspective, you just get a feel of, yeah, the dark side is completely dominating this planet. So though comparatively speaking, there's some characters that are more sympathetic than others, that one short story gives a good glimpse of, but we're still talking about the dark side. So, small point there. But with those more sympathetic characters, even then, when they're not trying to just murder everybody and they're not trying to just destroy everyone who's in their path, there's still even there a tension within themselves that they're trying to realize, no, we need to work together to move forward. So I may need to deny myself for the sake of the tribe, and feeling that tension there. Miller did a great job of it. But where's sort of the major climax contrast in this story comes? Well, it comes in part 4, entitled Savior. And this is where a number of the Sith who have been hiding their rebellion, hiding their assassination attempts of Yaru, who's the leader of the Sith, where those come to the surface. And in the midst of a huge battle that essentially people just discover, they sort of happen into, the pseudo-leader of the Kashiri, so the natives who have been now pretty much dominated by the Sith, the pseudo-leader, her name is Adari Val. She uses the confusion and the chaos to make her escape. And she unites as many as she can of her people, and they mount these flying creatures called Uvoks, and they just begin flying out into the endless ocean. There are rumors that there's lands beyond the ocean, and if they find them, fine. But if they don't, they would rather die in a watery death than continue to live under the subjugation of the Sith. And in part 4, that's really when the big divide happens. The Sith are in no place to even reach out and try to track them down because their civilization is so stunted and stilted. Because anytime they make progress, some new rising faction comes and destroys the progress of the previous regime because of pride, because of power. And so seeing how the fallenness, the backwardsness of the Sith culture is really the enemy of progress. It does certain things really, really well, like control, but it doesn't do things really well like engineer a future. And so a number of Sith Grand Lords and High Lords are certainly less vindictive and actually see the flaws of the Sith. There are 3 characters specifically, and I'll touch those in what I liked about it, who are the most, I think, good of the Sith, and you can see that in their stories. But for those who can make science and medicine and art the focus of the Sith, they are oppressed and they are rejected by the warrior class of the Sith. So, with that group of Kashiri that escaped, the reader is left to wonder, did they find something? Did they just die in the ocean? And the Sith, though are aware that some tried to make an escape, are in no place to track them down because they haven't developed their own technology. And so, is there a hope, though, that even those that are better leaders can change the culture? Well, you need to read the story yourself to find out. The Lost Tribe of the Sith is a truly fascinating collection of stories. There's some things that I really liked about this. I liked how tight each story was. Because they're short stories, there's really no time to get bogged down in really a lot of detail or long discourses or endless elements that you may have in a longer novel, a full-length novel. Each story was short and it was engaging. The characters, both the protagonists and the antagonists, were very well written. And I think Miller did a great job of understanding the Sith, showing how their selfishness and their pride even shows itself in the more likable characters. And even as you are rooting for some of these Sith to achieve their goals, because they are more noble than the others, you still can't help but see, oh yeah, I can see why their Sith culture is really hindering them, even as they're trying to overcome themselves. The Sith who recognized the fatal flaw of the Sith religion were particularly fascinating. So Ori in part 5, who is the daughter of one of the High Lords, her family is betrayed and found out for trying to do what Sith do, which is destroy the person who's in charge. And she has to flee. She loses everything and makes a choice to abandon that endless cycle, reject society, reject civilization, and run off with someone that she's fallen in love with and live for the other person. So I thought her story was very redemptive. Ori in part 5 I really enjoyed. Hiltz in part 8, who is a dusty old historian who is heartbroken every time a regime change happens, because everything that's good is going to be destroyed, and anything that hopefully is preserved, it's because of him and him just like saving things, and people don't really care about him because he's a dusty old historian. It's interesting to see how he then is in a position to help save what is partly good about the Sith, but even then he still has his own agendas. I really appreciated Hiltz. And then finally Adele, or Edel, I don't remember exactly what I said in my mind, but Adele in part 9, who is Hiltz's essentially protege. He's the main character, the main Sith in the final story, the culminating story. And he is interesting because he is a scientist, he is a builder, and when he begins to explore beyond the continent of the Sith, his interaction with the rest of the planet shows that he himself is seeing the divide, the hypocrisy of the Sith. And so I thought those three characters were my favorite. They were constantly balancing their own inner conflict with the generations of destruction that they had seen time and time again. And you have to ask yourself, are we still going to continue to do this? Or are we going to deny ourselves for the good of the furtherance of our tribe? So many Sith do not. They see the flaws of their ancestors. They do them without question, because that's what they do. But there are some who are trying to move the Sith forward, and I thought it was interesting to see that constant struggle. I really enjoyed this book. I'm giving it a 4 out of 5, and I thought Miller did a great job of, early on in the expanded universe, you get a dose of philosophy, which I think is going to be helpful when we move forward. You've seen what society looks like when the Sith are able to control things really unabated. No one is really standing against them, and you can see how Yeah, it's not going to work, especially not going to work with a planet of Sith. The Sith are really good in small numbers, and we're going to get that later in the story. And I'm interested to see how logically some Sith masters are going to figure that out, because we've seen what it looks like when a planet of Sith exists, and it doesn't work well. So, Star Wars, The Lost Tribe of the Sith, the collected stories by John Jackson Miller. Really enjoyed it. Encourage you to read it yourself. And if you're interested, you can like and subscribe. We're continuing our read through of the expanded universe, Star Wars Legends. This has been book 2, and I'm excited to see what comes up in the future. So thank you so much, and we'll catch you on the next video.